The sharp crack of a gavel shattered the afternoon quiet of Colfax, New Mexico territory, drawing all eyes to the wooden platform where Virginia Ashwood stood trembling in her threadbare blue dress, her chestnut hair tumbling in disheveled waves around her pale face. It was 1878, and the frontier town had seen its share of auctions, but never before had they witnessed a father offering his own daughter to settle a gambling debt. $500, bellowed Silas Ashwood, Virginia's father, his voice slurred from whiskey as he gripped the platform railing. $500 for my girl. She's 20 years old, healthy as a horse, and can cook better than any woman west of the Mississippi. Virginia's eyes remained fixed on the dirt street below, her knuckles white as she clutched her worn shawl around her shoulders. The spring air carried a chill that matched the cold dread in her stomach. The crowd of men, mostly miners, gamblers, and drifters, murmured among themselves, eyeing her with expressions ranging from pity to predatory interest. "This ain't right, Silas," Sheriff Thomas called from the edge of the gathering. "You can't sell a person in this territory." Silas sneered, swaying slightly. "Ain't selling a person, Sheriff. Just offering her services as a wife to whoever covers my debts. Perfectly legal arrangement." From the back of the crowd, a tall figure pushed forward. Isaac Burke had only been in Colfax for 3 days, having arrived with a herd of cattle bound for the railhead. His sun-browned face was partially hidden beneath the brim of his worn Stetson, but there was no disguising the hard set of his jaw as he approached. $498.75. A portly man with yellowed teeth shouted, prompting scattered laughter. "500 even," countered another voice belonging to Edward Hollister, the town's wealthiest resident and owner of the mining company that employed half the men present. Virginia's shoulders sagged further. Hollister was nearly 60, with a reputation for cruelty toward his 3 previous wives, none of whom had survived beyond their 2nd year of marriage. "600, came a clear, steady voice from the crowd's edge. The townspeople parted to reveal Isaac standing with his boots planted firmly in the dust, one hand resting on his gun belt. His hazel eyes were fixed not on Virginia but on her father. $600, Isaac repeated. "I'll cover Ashwood's debts in full." Silas narrowed his bloodshot eyes. "Now we're talking. Any other offers, gentlemen?" Hollister spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the ground. $700. A cold smile stretched across Isaac's face. $1,000, he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent square. "Cash, right now." Virginia finally lifted her gaze, meeting Isaac's eyes for the first time. She found no lechery there, only a quiet, controlled anger that somehow didn't seem directed at her. "Sold," Silas shouted before anyone could counter the offer. "Come settle up, Cowboy." Isaac approached the platform, removing a leather pouch from inside his vest. "I'll need to see proof of the debts first." "What's that supposed to mean?" Silas demanded. "It means I'm paying what you actually owe, not whatever inflated figure you've dreamed up." Isaac's voice was level but left no room for argument. Hollister stepped forward. "He owes me $500 for gambling debts incurred at my establishment." "And the other $500? Isaac asked, his eyes never leaving Silas's increasingly uncomfortable face. "There ain't no other," Silas began, but was interrupted by Sheriff Thomas. "He owes back rent to the widow Jenkins, about $75, and there's the matter of his unpaid tab at the general store." The sheriff crossed his arms. "I'd say it all comes to about 600, not 1,000. Isaac nodded, counting out $600 in gold and paper currency. He handed $500 to Hollister and passed the rest to the sheriff. "See that the other creditors get their due." "Now wait just a minute," Silas protested, his face flushing. "We had a deal for 1,000. Isaac turned to face him, his hand dropping casually to rest on his revolver. "The deal was to cover your debts. I've done that." "Then what about my daughter?" Silas demanded. "You bought her fair and square." "I did no such thing," Isaac replied evenly. "I paid your debts. Miss Ashwood is free to go wherever she pleases." A murmur ran through the crowd. Virginia stared at the cowboy in disbelief, her mind struggling to comprehend what was happening. Isaac turned to her, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. "Madam, you don't know me from Adam, but I'd be pleased to escort you to safety if you wish. Or I can leave you be. The choice is yours." Virginia glanced at her father, whose face had twisted into an ugly scowl, then back to Isaac's calm, steady gaze. In that moment, she made a decision that would change the course of her life forever. "I would appreciate an escort, Mr. Burke, Isaac Burke." He offered his hand to help her down from the platform. "You can't do this." Silas lunged forward, grabbing Virginia's arm roughly. "She's my daughter." "She's a grown woman," Isaac countered, his voice hardening as he stepped between them. "And I believe she's made her choice." Sheriff Thomas moved forward. "That's enough, Silas. Your debts are paid. Count yourself lucky and go sleep it off." Virginia descended the steps, her legs trembling so badly she feared they might give way beneath her. Isaac offered his arm for support, which she gratefully accepted. "Thank you," she whispered, still unable to believe what had just transpired. "Don't thank me yet," he replied quietly. "We should get you somewhere safe first." As they walked away from the town square, Virginia could feel the weight of stares following them, along with the hushed whispers of the crowd. She kept her eyes forward, determined not to look back at the life she was leaving behind. "I don't understand," she said when they were out of earshot. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Isaac's expression remained unreadable. "Where I come from, men don't trade women like cattle. It's as simple as that." "And where exactly do you come from, Mr. Burke?" "Texas, originally. But I've been moving cattle up and down the territories for the past 8 years. He glanced down at her. "Do you have somewhere to go, Miss Ashwood?" "Family, perhaps." Virginia shook her head. "My mother died 3 years ago. It's just been father and me since then, moving from town to town as his debts caught up with us." She paused, the full reality of her situation sinking in. "I suppose I have nowhere." Isaac nodded thoughtfully. "There's a respectable boarding house at the edge of town run by a widow named Mrs. Collins. I can arrange a room for you there until you decide what you want to do next." "I have no money," Virginia admitted, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "Consider it part of the debt I paid. No strings attached." Virginia stopped walking, forcing Isaac to halt beside her. "Why are you being so kind? What do you want from me?" Isaac studied her face for a moment. "Nothing, Miss Ashwood. Contrary to what you might think of cowboys, some of us were raised right." For the first time since the auction began, Virginia felt something other than fear, a flicker of hope, fragile but unmistakable. "Call me Virginia," she said softly. "And thank you, Mr. Burke. I won't forget this." Isaac smiled then, a genuine expression that transformed his weathered face. "Isaac," he corrected. "And you're welcome, Virginia." They continued toward the boarding house as the sun began its descent behind the distant mountains, casting long shadows across the dusty streets of Colfax. Virginia didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in years, she dared to believe it might hold something better than today. Mrs. Collins was a stern-faced woman with kind eyes who asked few questions when Isaac explained the situation, omitting certain details to preserve Virginia's dignity. She showed Virginia to a small but clean room on the second floor, promising hot water for bathing would be brought up shortly. "I'll be staying at the Frontier Hotel for the next few days," Isaac explained as they stood in the boarding house hallway. My business with the cattle drive is nearly concluded. If you need anything, you've done more than enough, Virginia interrupted, her voice thick with emotion. I can never repay you. No repayment necessary. He settled his hat back on his head. Good evening, Virginia. As he turned to leave, Virginia found herself reaching out to touch his arm. Wait, would you? Would you join me for supper tomorrow, Mrs. Collins said meals are served in the dining room at 6. It's the least I can offer. Isaac hesitated, then nodded. I'd be honored. After he left, Virginia sat on the edge of the narrow bed, her mind reeling from the day's events. For the first time in years, she was free from her father's shadow, free to make her own choices. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. When the hot water arrived, Virginia sank into the bath with a sigh that released years of tension. She scrubbed away the dust and shame of the auction block, determined to begin anew. As she dressed in her one spare gown, faded but clean, she caught sight of herself in the small mirror hanging on the wall. "You're going to be all right," she whispered to her reflection, hoping with all her heart that it was true. The following morning, Virginia awoke to sunlight streaming through the curtains. For a moment, disorientation gripped her. Where was her father's snoring, the lingering smell of whiskey, the cramped wagon they'd called home for the past year? Then reality flooded back, and with it, a profound sense of relief. After a simple breakfast of biscuits and coffee, Virginia approached Mrs. Collins with a straightforward question. "Do you know of any work available in town for a woman?" The older woman appraised her thoughtfully. "Can you read and write?" Virginia nodded. "My mother was a schoolteacher before she married. She taught me well. The general store might need help with their books. Old Mr. Wilson's eyesight isn't what it used to be." Mrs. Collins folded her arms. "You can sew, I assume?" "Yes, and cook." "Good. I could use help around here, especially with mending and laundry. Wouldn't pay much, but it would cover your room and board until something better comes along." Virginia felt a weight lift from her shoulders. "I would be most grateful for the opportunity." "Don't thank me yet, Mrs. Collins warned with a small smile. "Wait until you've seen the pile of linens that need mending." The day passed in a blur of activity as Virginia threw herself into work, grateful for the distraction. By late afternoon, her fingers were sore from needle and thread, but her mind was clearer than it had been in months. The physical labor left little room for dwelling on her circumstances. As 6 o'clock approached, however, nervousness set in. Virginia changed into her blue dress, the same one she'd worn at the auction, though she'd spent an hour removing stains and pressing out wrinkles. She pinched her cheeks for color and arranged her hair as best she could without proper pins. When she descended to the dining room, she spotted Isaac immediately. He stood as she entered, dressed in clean trousers and a pressed shirt, his dark hair still damp from washing. Several other boarders were already seated, eyeing them with undisguised curiosity. "You look well," Isaac said simply as he held her chair. "As do you," she replied, noting how different he appeared without trail dust covering him. His features were more refined than she'd initially realized, his hazel eyes flecked with gold in the lamplight. They exchanged pleasantries as Mrs. Collins served a hearty meal of beef stew and fresh bread. Virginia was acutely aware of the sidelong glances from the other diners, though none dared address the events of the previous day directly. "I secured employment today," Virginia announced when there was a lull in their conversation. "Mrs. Collins has kindly offered me work here, and I'll be helping at the general store with bookkeeping." Isaac's expression warmed with approval. "That's excellent news. Mr. Wilson is a fair employer from what I've heard." "And you?" Virginia asked. "How long will you remain in Colfax?" A shadow crossed Isaac's face. I had planned to depart with the cattle drive tomorrow, but there's been a complication with the buyer. It may be another week before we conclude our business. Virginia tried to ignore the flutter of relief she felt. I'm sorry to hear of your troubles. Are you? His direct gaze caught her off guard. Because I confess I'm not entirely disappointed to extend my stay. Color rose to Virginia's cheeks. Mr. Burke, Isaac, he corrected gently. Isaac, she amended. I hope you don't feel obligated to look after me. I'm determined to make my own way. I have no doubt of that. But perhaps we might enjoy each other's company while circumstance keeps us in the same place. His expression was open, lacking the presumption she'd grown to expect from men. Virginia considered his words. Her instinct was to maintain distance to protect herself from further disappointment. But there was something about Isaac Burke that made her want to take a chance. I'd like that, she finally said. Their conversation flowed more easily after that, touching on books they had read, places they had seen, and dreams they harbored. Virginia learned that Isaac had been orphaned young and raised by his uncle, a rancher who taught him the cattle business. He spoke with passion about someday owning land of his own, raising horses rather than driving cattle. And you, he asked, what would you do if you could choose any life? Virginia hesitated, unaccustomed to being asked about her own desires. I've never given it much thought, she admitted. Survival has been my primary concern for so long. But if survival were guaranteed, if you could want something just because it would bring you joy, the question stirred something inside her, a longing she'd buried beneath years of practicality. I'd like a home, she said softly. Not just a place to sleep, but somewhere that belongs to me that no one can take away. Perhaps a small farm with chickens and a vegetable garden. She smiled sheepishly. It's not a grand ambition. On the contrary, Isaac replied earnestly, it sounds perfect. After supper, they stepped onto the porch, where the cool evening air was scented with sage and pinyon pine. The first stars were appearing in the deepening blue sky. May I call on you again? Isaac asked as they stood side by side, watching night descend over the town. I'd be disappointed if you didn't, Virginia answered honestly. He smiled, tipping his hat. Then I'll bid you good night, Virginia Ashwood. As he walked away, Virginia wrapped her arms around herself, not from cold but in an attempt to contain the unfamiliar feelings expanding within her chest. She'd known Isaac Burke for barely a day, yet he'd shown her more kindness than she'd experienced in years. It was dangerous to hope, she knew. Dangerous to believe that her life could change so completely, so suddenly. Yet hope bloomed anyway, fragile but persistent as a wildflower pushing through rocky soil. The next morning, Virginia was arranging freshly laundered sheets in the linen closet when Mrs. Collins appeared at her elbow. Your father's at the door, the older woman said, her voice tight with disapproval. Virginia's hands froze on the folded linen. Did he say what he wants to speak with you? He looks sober, for what that's worth. Mrs. Collins's expression softened slightly. I can send him away if you prefer. Drawing a deep breath, Virginia shook her head. No, I'll speak with him. She found Silas Ashwood standing awkwardly in the boarding house foyer, hat in hand, his face bearing the haggard evidence of hard living. He looked smaller somehow, diminished without the artificial courage whiskey provided. Virginia, he said, his voice gruff, you're looking well. What do you want, father? She kept her distance, arms crossed protectively over her chest. He shifted uncomfortably. I came to. Well, to see how you're faring. As you can see, I'm perfectly fine. Better than I've been in some time, actually. Silas winced at her cold tone. I deserve that. I know I do. He twisted the brim of his hat between calloused fingers. That cowboy, did he treat you proper? Virginia's chin lifted defiantly. Mr. Burke is a gentleman, which is more than I can say for my own father, who tried to sell me to the highest bidder." "I was desperate, girl," Silas protested. "Those men would have killed me if I didn't pay up. And that justified trading your daughter like livestock." Her voice trembled with suppressed anger. "You've done many reprehensible things over the years, father, but this was beyond imagining." Silas had the grace to look ashamed. "I ain't proud of it. The whiskey, it clouds a man's judgment something fierce." "The whiskey," Virginia echoed bitterly. "Always the whiskey, never you, never your choices." They stood in uncomfortable silence for a moment before Silas spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm leaving Colfax. Heading to California, maybe. Thought you might want to come along." Virginia stared at him in disbelief. "Come along? After what you did? You're my daughter, my only kin. You forfeited the right to call me that when you put me on that auction block." Virginia's voice was steady now, her resolve hardening. "I wish you well, father, but my place is no longer with you." Silas looked as though she'd struck him, but he nodded slowly. "I reckon that's fair." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, which he extended toward her. "Your mother would want you to have this." Virginia hesitated before accepting the item, a simple gold locket on a delicate chain. She recognized it immediately as her mother's most treasured possession. "I kept meaning to pawn it," Silas admitted, "but somehow I never could." Virginia clutched the locket, memories of her gentle mother washing over her. "Thank you for this, at least." Silas settled his hat back on his head. "Take care of yourself, Virginia." "Goodbye, father." She watched through the window as he walked away, his shoulders slumped in defeat. A complicated mix of emotions churned within her: relief, sorrow, anger, and a strange sort of pity. For all his faults, Silas Ashwood was the only family she had known for most of her life. His departure marked the end of an era, but also the beginning of something entirely her own. When he disappeared from view, Virginia opened the locket to find a small portrait of her mother on one side and a lock of dark hair, her own as a baby, on the other. She fastened the chain around her neck, feeling both heavier and lighter as she returned to her work. Later that afternoon, Virginia was sorting inventory at Wilson's General Store when the bell above the door jingled. She looked up to see Isaac entering, his expression brightening when he spotted her behind the counter. "Good afternoon," she greeted him, suddenly conscious of her work apron and hastily pinned hair. "Good afternoon." He removed his hat as he approached. "I see you've settled into your new position already. Mr. Wilson was kind enough to hire me this morning. I'm learning the system." She gestured to the ledgers spread before her. Isaac nodded approvingly. "I've come to purchase supplies before we move the herd. We'll be departing for the railhead in 2 days. Virginia felt a pang of disappointment but kept her expression neutral. "I'll be happy to assist you." As she helped gather the items on his list, Isaac mentioned casually, "I saw your father leaving town earlier, wagon packed for travel." Virginia's hand stilled momentarily on a sack of coffee beans. "Yes, he came to say goodbye. Are you all right?" The genuine concern in his voice touched her. "I am. It's for the best, truly." Isaac studied her face before nodding. "If you say so." When she finished assembling his supplies, Isaac paid for the purchases, then hesitated before leaving. "I was wondering if you might join me for supper this evening, not at the boarding house, but at the hotel restaurant. They serve a fine steak, I'm told." The invitation surprised her. "That sounds lovely, but—" Virginia gestured to herself self-consciously. "I have only 2 dresses to my name, neither suitable for dining at a hotel." Isaac's expression softened. "You look perfectly fine to me, but if it would make you more comfortable." He reached into his pocket and withdrew several bills. "Consider this an advance on your wages from Mr. Wilson. I've already spoken with him." Virginia stared at the money, torn between pride and practicality. I couldn't possibly. You can and you should, Isaac interrupted gently. Everyone deserves a fresh start, Virginia, including you. After a moment's hesitation, she accepted the money. Thank you. I'll repay every cent. I know you will. His smile reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. Shall I call for you at 7? Virginia nodded, warmth spreading through her chest. I'll be ready. After her shift ended, Virginia hurried to the dressmaker's shop, where she selected a ready-made dress in a deep green that the seamstress assured her complemented her complexion. It was simpler than the elaborate gowns displayed in the window, but far nicer than anything she'd owned before. She also purchased a pair of modest shoes, hairpins, and after much deliberation a small pot of rose-scented cream. Mrs. Collins helped her style her hair, commenting with approval on the new dress. That cowboy of yours has good taste, she remarked as she secured the last pin. He's not my cowboy, Virginia protested, though she couldn't help smiling at her reflection. Not yet, perhaps, Mrs. Collins replied with knowing eyes, but I've seen the way he looks at you. When Isaac arrived promptly at 7, his appreciative gaze confirmed Mrs. Collins's words. He offered Virginia his arm, and together they walked through town toward the hotel, attracting curious glances from passers-by. You look beautiful, Isaac said quietly. The dress makes quite a difference, Virginia replied, though she stood straighter under his admiration. It's not the dress, he assured her. The hotel restaurant was the finest establishment in Colfax, with tablecloths, polished silverware, and a pianist playing softly in the corner. Virginia felt self-conscious at first, acutely aware of her recent humiliation at the auction. But as the evening progressed, surrounded by Isaac's attentive conversation and obvious respect, her anxiety gradually melted away. Tell me about Texas, she prompted as they enjoyed tender steaks accompanied by potatoes and green beans. What made you leave? Isaac's expression turned contemplative. After the war, things changed. My uncle's ranch struggled, and when he passed, there wasn't enough left to maintain it. I sold what remained and took to driving cattle. It was meant to be temporary, a way to save money to start fresh. And now? 8 years is a long time to be temporary, he smiled ruefully. It is, but I'm close now. 2 more seasons and I'll have enough saved to buy land in Colorado Territory. Good grazing land with water rights. It sounds wonderful, Virginia said sincerely. It could be. Isaac's eyes held hers. What about you? Will you stay in Colfax? Virginia considered the question. I haven't decided. It seems as good a place as any to begin again. And what of your dreams? The home of your own. Dreams require money, she replied pragmatically. For now, I'm grateful to have work and a roof over my head. Isaac leaned forward slightly. What if I told you I know of a small parcel for sale just outside town? 3 acres with a modest cabin, neglected but sound. The owner died last winter, and his son in Denver is eager to sell. Virginia's heart quickened. It sounds ideal, but well beyond my means. Perhaps, perhaps not. Isaac took a sip of his coffee. The work you're doing for Wilson and Mrs. Collins is respectable but won't build savings quickly. However, I understand Mrs. Patterson is seeking someone to tutor her children. With your education, you might be well suited. How do you know about my education? Isaac's smile was slightly embarrassed. I may have made inquiries. The point is, tutoring pays considerably better than shop work. Virginia was torn between irritation at his presumption and gratitude for his interest in her welfare. You seem very invested in my future, Mr. Burke. Isaac, he corrected automatically. And yes, I suppose I am. May I ask why? He considered her question seriously. Because I admire your resilience. Because I enjoy your company. Because—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Because when I saw you on that auction block, something inside me couldn't bear to see such dignity treated with so little respect." The honesty in his voice silenced any objection Virginia might have made. They finished their meal in thoughtful conversation, and by the time Isaac escorted her back to the boarding house, a tentative understanding had formed between them. "Will you consider speaking with Mrs. Patterson?" Isaac asked as they stood on the porch. Virginia nodded. "I will. Thank you for the suggestion and for a lovely evening. The pleasure was entirely mine." He hesitated, then lifted her hand to his lips for the briefest of moments. "Good night, Virginia." As she watched him walk away, Virginia touched her mother's locket, drawing strength from the connection to her past, as she contemplated an increasingly intriguing future. The following morning, Virginia called on Mrs. Patterson, the wife of Colfax's bank manager. The elegant woman was immediately taken with Virginia's refined speech and knowledge of literature, offering her the position on the spot. The salary was indeed generous, more than double what she would earn at the general store. "Mr. Wilson will be disappointed to lose you, Mrs. Collins commented when Virginia shared the news. "I've arranged to continue helping with his bookkeeping on Saturdays," Virginia explained. "I don't wish to seem ungrateful for his kindness." Mrs. Collins nodded approvingly. "You've made quite an impression on this town in just a few days, my dear." It was true, Virginia realized. People who had witnessed her humiliation now greeted her with respect as she walked through town. She had secured employment, made acquaintances, and begun to establish herself as a woman of capability rather than an object of pity. When Isaac called on her that evening, she eagerly shared her success. "Mrs. Patterson offered me the position immediately. I begin tomorrow with her 3 children ages 8, 10, and 12. They seem bright and well-behaved." Isaac's genuine pleasure in her accomplishment warmed her more than his compliments had. "I never doubted you would impress her." They walked together through town as the setting sun painted the mountains in shades of purple and gold. Virginia was keenly aware that Isaac's time in Colfax was dwindling. His cattle drive would depart the next morning. "I'd like to show you something," he said, guiding her toward the outskirts of town. "If you're amenable." Curiosity piqued, Virginia followed as he led her down a winding dirt road that branched from the main street. After about a mile, they came to a small cabin set back from the path, surrounded by cottonwood trees and untended fields. "Is this—" Virginia breathed, immediately recognizing it from Isaac's description. "The property I mentioned." He watched her face closely. "Would you like to see inside?" The cabin was dusty and bare, with only a few pieces of furniture remaining, but Virginia could immediately see its potential. The main room was spacious enough for a dining table and sitting area, with a stone fireplace along one wall. A small kitchen occupied the back corner, and a ladder led to a loft sleeping area. Windows on 3 sides would allow ample light and cross breezes in summer. "It's perfect," she whispered, running her hand along a wooden countertop. "It needs work," Isaac cautioned. "The roof requires patching and the well should be cleaned out, but the structure is sound." Virginia turned slowly, taking in every detail. "How much is the owner asking?" Isaac named a figure that, while not unreasonable for the property, was still far beyond her current means. Her expression must have fallen, for he quickly added, "With your new position, you could save enough for a down payment within 6 months. The owner's son might be willing to arrange terms for the remainder." "Why are you showing me this?" Virginia asked, her voice catching slightly. Isaac stepped closer, his eyes earnest in the fading daylight that filtered through the dusty windows. "Because I want you to know that your dream is possible, Virginia, That independence is within your reach." She studied his face, trying to understand the complexity of emotions she saw there. "And what of your dream? Your land in Colorado? That remains my goal." Virginia nodded, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in her chest. Of course, Isaac Burke had his own plans, his own future to build, one that didn't include her. She had known him for only 3 days. It was foolish to feel disappointment. "Thank you for showing me this," she said, summoning a smile. "It gives me something tangible to work toward." As they walked back to town in the gathering twilight, Virginia committed every detail of the cabin to memory. It represented something she had scarcely dared to hope for, a place of her own, earned through her own efforts. They reached the boarding house too quickly, and the knowledge that Isaac would depart at dawn hung heavy between them. "Will you write?" Virginia asked impulsively. "To let me know you arrived safely at the railhead." Isaac's expression brightened. "If you'd like me to, I would." He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I got this for you, a parting gift." Virginia carefully unwrapped it to find a leather-bound journal with cream-colored pages. "It's beautiful," she said, genuinely touched. "I thought you might use it to plan your future, or simply to record your thoughts." His smile was tinged with something like regret. "I've enjoyed knowing you, Virginia Ashwood." "And I you, Isaac Burke." They stood in silence, neither quite ready to say goodbye. Finally, Isaac bent forward and placed a chaste kiss on her cheek, his lips warm against her skin. "Until we meet again," he said softly. Virginia watched him walk away, clutching the journal to her chest. The prospect of returning to her solitary room felt suddenly bleak. The future she had been so excited about just hours before now shadowed by his departure. That night, she opened the journal and wrote her first entry. "Today Isaac Burke showed me a cabin that could be mine. Tomorrow he leaves for destinations unknown to me. I have known him for only 3 days, yet I feel as though something essential is departing with him. Is it foolish to miss someone I barely know? Perhaps, but I cannot deny the emptiness his absence will create. He has asked nothing of me and given much. I pray our paths cross again someday." The following morning, Virginia rose before dawn and stood at her window, watching as the cattle drive assembled at the edge of town. From this distance, she could just make out Isaac's tall figure directing the cowboys as they prepared to move the herd. She resisted the urge to run down and bid him farewell one last time. What would be the point? Their lives were moving in different directions. As the herd began its slow progress northward, Virginia turned away from the window. She had her own path to follow now, one that led to independence rather than attachment. It was better this way, she told herself firmly. Yet she found herself counting the days until his promised letter might arrive. Life settled into a steady rhythm for Virginia. Her days were filled with teaching the Patterson children, her evenings with helping Mrs. Collins at the boarding house. On Saturdays, she kept the books for Mr. Wilson, carefully setting aside as much of her earnings as she could manage. The cabin remained foremost in her thoughts, a goal that gave purpose to her frugality. 2 weeks after Isaac's departure, his letter arrived. Virginia's hands trembled slightly as she broke the seal, retreating to the privacy of her room to read his words. "Dear Virginia, as promised, I write to inform you that we reached the railhead safely, despite a thunderstorm that nearly scattered the herd on the second night. The cattle have been delivered and payment received, concluding my business successfully. I find myself thinking often of Colfax, though I spent less than a week there. More specifically, I think of you and hope that you are prospering in your new position with the Patterson family. Have you visited the cabin again? I spoke with Mr. Finch at the bank about your interest in the property, and he assured me the owner is in no hurry to sell, so you may take your time in making arrangements. My plans have changed somewhat. Instead of returning directly to Texas, I have accepted a position breaking horses at a ranch near Denver for the next 2 months. The work pays well and will bring me closer to my goal of purchasing land. If you wish to write, letters addressed to me at the Rockingham Ranch outside Denver will reach me until October. With fond regards, Isaac Burke, Virginia. Read the letter 3 times before placing it carefully in her journal. The knowledge that Isaac had spoken to the banker on her behalf filled her with a mixture of gratitude and irritation. His continued interest in her welfare was touching, yet she was determined to manage her affairs independently. Nevertheless, she found herself composing a reply that same evening. Dear Isaac, thank you for your letter. I am pleased to hear of your safe arrival and successful conclusion of business. The thunderstorm must have been quite an adventure from the safety of my boarding house room. I can appreciate such excitement more than I might have in person. My position with the Pattersons continues splendidly. The children are intelligent and eager to learn, making my task more pleasure than labor. Mrs. Patterson has introduced me to several prominent families in the area, expanding my circle of acquaintance considerably. I have visited the cabin twice more, each time discovering new details to appreciate. The wildflowers surrounding the property are particularly beautiful at sunset. I've begun sketching plans for improvements I might make when not if it becomes mine. Mr. Finch has indeed been most accommodating regarding possible arrangements. I wish you success with your horse-breaking endeavor. It sounds both lucrative and dangerous in equal measure. Please take care not to be thrown too often. Sincerely, Virginia Ashwood. She sealed the letter before she could reconsider her words, which seemed to reveal more of her feelings than she had intended. The next morning, she entrusted it to the stagecoach driver heading toward Denver. Summer progressed into early autumn, bringing cooler temperatures and spectacular colors to the mountains surrounding Colfax. Virginia and Isaac exchanged letters regularly, each communication deepening their connection, despite the distance separating them. His letters became less formal, more personal, sharing stories of the horses he trained and his plans for the future. Hers revealed more of her daily life and her progress toward purchasing the cabin. In late September, a letter arrived bearing unexpected news. Dear Virginia, I write with a proposition that I hope you will consider carefully. My contract with the Rockingham concludes next week, after which I had planned to return to Texas for the winter. However, an opportunity has arisen that alters my course. A property adjoining the land I've been considering in Colorado has become available at a favorable price. Together, the parcels would form an ideal ranch, with ample grazing land and reliable water sources. The owner is motivated to sell quickly, requiring me to make a decision sooner than anticipated. My funds, while substantial, are not quite sufficient to purchase both properties immediately. I could secure a loan for the difference, but that would delay my ability to stock the land properly. Here is my proposition. I will be passing through Colfax on my way to inspect the Colorado properties. If the cabin you admire remains available, I would be willing to purchase it now, with the understanding that you would continue saving toward buying it from me, on terms more favorable than any bank would offer. This arrangement would benefit us both. You would have immediate possession of your home while continuing to work toward ownership, and I would have a secure investment for funds not immediately required for the ranch purchase. I understand this suggestion may seem presumptuous. Please know that I make it with the utmost respect for your independence. You would be under no obligation beyond the financial terms we agree upon, which I would have formalized legally to protect your interests. I expect to arrive in Colfax by month's end. Please consider my offer until then. Yours sincerely, Isaac. Virginia read the letter multiple times, emotions warring within her. The practical part of her recognized the sensibility of the arrangement. It would indeed allow her to move into the cabin much sooner than she could manage otherwise. Yet another part rebelled against accepting such significant help, even with the understanding that she would eventually repay him. And what did it mean that he had signed the letter simply, yours? After several days of indecision, Virginia discussed the matter with Mrs. Collins, whose pragmatic advice helped clarify her thinking. It's a business arrangement that happens to benefit you both, the older woman pointed out. You'd still be paying for the cabin just to him instead of the bank. And from what you've told me, he's an honorable man who wouldn't take advantage. But what if people misinterpret? A single woman living in a cabin purchased by a man. Mrs. Collins waved away her concern. Have the agreement drawn up by Mr. Finch with witnesses and proper documentation. Anyone who matters will understand it's a legitimate arrangement. By the time Isaac's arrival date approached, Virginia had made her decision. She would accept his offer, with clear terms establishing her eventual full ownership of the property. It was, as Mrs. Collins had said, a practical solution that benefited them both. Yet as she stood at the stagecoach stop on the appointed day, watching for his arrival, Virginia could not deny that practicality had little to do with the nervous flutter in her stomach, or the care she had taken with her appearance that morning. When the coach finally appeared in a cloud of dust, Virginia smoothed her skirts and took a deep breath, attempting to calm her racing heart. Passengers began disembarking: a family with small children, an elderly couple, a salesman with sample cases but no Isaac. Just as disappointment began to settle over her, a familiar figure on horseback appeared from around the bend in the road. Isaac Burke rode toward her, leading a packhorse laden with supplies. He had clearly not traveled by stagecoach as she'd expected. He spotted her waiting and urged his horse forward, his face breaking into a wide smile that made Virginia's breath catch. 3 months had changed him subtly. His skin was more tanned, his shoulders somehow broader, but his hazel eyes held the same warmth she remembered. "Virginia," he called as he dismounted in a fluid motion. "You're a sight for sore eyes." "As are you," she replied, suddenly shy despite their months of correspondence. "I was watching for the stagecoach. I prefer traveling on horseback when possible." He secured his horses to the hitching post before turning to her fully. "You look well, happy." "I am well," she confirmed. "Colfax has been good to me." They stood for a moment in awkward silence, the ease of their written communication temporarily lost in the reality of physical presence. "Have you considered my proposition?" Isaac finally asked. Virginia nodded. "I have. If you're still amenable, I'd like to accept with proper legal documentation of the terms." Relief washed over his features. "I'm glad. I was concerned you might find it presumptuous." "Not presumptuous," she corrected. "Generous, certainly, but also practical for both of us." Isaac's smile returned. "Then shall we visit Mr. Finch to discuss the details, and perhaps see the cabin afterward? I'd like that very much." They walked side by side toward the bank, their initial awkwardness gradually dissolving as they fell into the comfortable rhythm of their correspondence. Isaac shared stories of his journey, while Virginia updated him on developments in Colfax. Mr. Finch received them warmly, especially once he understood the nature of their business. As the town's banker, he was delighted to facilitate a property transaction, even one with unconventional terms. "The cabin's owner has reduced his asking price," he informed them. Seems he's purchased a business in Denver and is eager to liquidate his holdings here. Isaac glanced at Virginia, eyebrows raised. That's fortunate timing. They spent an hour discussing specifics, the purchase price, monthly payments Virginia would make to Isaac, interest rates far below bank standards, and terms for transferring ownership once the balance was paid. Mr. Finch drafted an agreement that protected both parties' interests while maintaining the utmost propriety. I'll have this typed up for signatures tomorrow, the banker assured them. In the meantime, I can issue a receipt for your deposit, Mr. Burke, to secure the property. As they left the bank, Isaac suggested they ride out to view the cabin together. I'd like to see if it's as charming as I remember. Virginia hesitated. What about your horses? You must be tired from your journey. The horses could use the short exercise after a long day yesterday. And I'm never too tired to inspect a good investment. His eyes crinkled with humor. Besides, I'm curious to see those wildflowers you mentioned in your letter. They rode double on Isaac's gelding, with Virginia perched somewhat awkwardly in front of him. The physical proximity sent her pulse racing in a most disconcerting way, especially when the horse's movement occasionally pressed her back against Isaac's chest. "Have you ridden much?" he asked, his voice close to her ear. "Not since I was a girl," she admitted. "Father sold our last horse years ago to pay a debt." Isaac's arm tightened slightly around her waist. "Well, every proper homestead needs at least one good horse. Perhaps that should be your first purchase once you're settled." The cabin looked even more appealing than Virginia remembered, its weathered logs glowing warmly in the late afternoon sunlight. As Isaac secured the horse, she walked the perimeter of the property, mentally placing a vegetable garden here, a chicken coop there, perhaps fruit trees along the southern edge. "You seem quite at home already," Isaac observed as he joined her. "I've imagined living here so many times, it feels familiar." She turned to face him fully. "Thank you for making this possible, Isaac. I know the arrangement makes financial sense for you, but it means more to me than I can adequately express." His expression softened as he reached out to tuck a stray curl behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Your happiness means more to me than financial sense, Virginia." The air between them seemed to still, charged with unspoken feelings. For a moment, Virginia thought he might kiss her, but instead he stepped back, gesturing toward the cabin's door. "Shall we check the interior? Make sure there are no unwanted tenants." They spent another hour examining the cabin thoroughly, discussing necessary repairs and possible improvements. By the time they mounted the horse to return to town, the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "When do you leave for Colorado?" Virginia asked as they rode back, her voice carefully neutral. "I should depart by week's end," Isaac replied. "The seller expects me by the 15th. Virginia nodded, trying to ignore her disappointment. She had known his stay would be brief, yet somehow she had allowed herself to imagine otherwise. And if the properties meet your expectations, what then? Isaac was quiet for a moment, his breath warm against her hair. "Then I begin building my ranch. It will take time, structures to erect, livestock to acquire, hands to hire. But by spring, I should have a functioning operation." "It sounds wonderful," Virginia said sincerely. "Your dream realized at last." "Part of it," he replied cryptically. They returned to town as twilight deepened into dusk. Isaac escorted Virginia to the boarding house, where Mrs. Collins had prepared a room for him during his stay. "Will you join me for supper?" he asked as they stood on the porch. Virginia smiled. "I believe that's my line, Mr. Burke. After all, you're a guest in my current home." His answering laugh warmed her more than the shawl around her shoulders. "Then I accept your invitation, Miss Ashwood." Over the next few days, they fell into an easy companionship, spending most of their waking hours together. Isaac accompanied Virginia to her tutoring sessions, impressing the Patterson children with stories of cattle drives and wild horses. They visited the cabin daily, making plans for repairs and improvements. In the evenings, they sat on the boarding house porch, talking until Mrs. Collins pointedly extinguished the exterior lamp. On Isaac's final night in Colfax, they stood on that same porch under a canopy of stars, reluctant to say good night despite the late hour. "I've been thinking," Isaac said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "The Colorado property's there larger than what one man needs, at least initially." Virginia looked up at him questioningly. Meaning I could manage quite well with a partner, someone with good sense and determination, someone who understands the value of a home. His eyes held hers steadily. "Someone like you, Virginia," her heart stuttered. "Are you proposing a business arrangement?" "No," he said simply. "I'm proposing marriage." Virginia stared at him, momentarily speechless. Isaac continued, words tumbling out with uncharacteristic urgency. "I know it seems sudden, but I've thought of little else since I left Colfax 3 months ago. Every letter you wrote confirmed what I already suspected, that you are the woman I want to build a life with." "Isaac, you don't need to answer now," he interrupted gently. "Take time to consider. I'll return in 1 month after securing the Colorado properties. If your answer is yes, we can be married here and travel to our new home together. If it's no, our arrangement regarding the cabin stands unchanged." Virginia's mind raced. Marriage to Isaac Burke. The idea was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. She had known him for such a short time, yet she couldn't deny the connection between them or the way her heart lifted whenever he was near. "A month is a reasonable time for consideration," she finally managed, her voice steadier than she felt. Relief flooded his features. "Thank you for not refusing outright. Did you expect me to? I wasn't sure." His smile was self-deprecating. "I'm a simple cowboy offering a life of hard work in untamed country to a woman of refinement and education. It's hardly the romantic proposal you deserve." Virginia found herself stepping closer to him. "On the contrary, offering a shared dream seems far more romantic than flowery words or extravagant gestures." Emboldened by her response, Isaac reached for her hands, enfolding them in his larger ones. "Then may I hope for a favorable answer when I return?" Instead of replying, Virginia rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his in a brief, chaste kiss, her first. "Is that hope enough?" she whispered. Isaac's expression transformed into one of such joy that Virginia's remaining doubts began to dissolve. He drew her gently into his arms and returned her kiss with one of exquisite tenderness that nevertheless sent warmth cascading through her entire being. "More than enough," he murmured against her lips. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Virginia rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. The future stretched before her, uncertain, challenging, but filled with possibilities she had never dared imagine. "1 month," she said softly. "I'll have my answer ready." The following morning, Virginia stood once more at the edge of town, watching Isaac ride away toward Colorado. Unlike his departure 3 months earlier, however, this parting held the promise of reunion rather than finality. As his figure disappeared into the distance, Virginia turned toward Mr. Wilson's store, where she had agreed to help with inventory that day. Her heart felt simultaneously fuller and lighter than it had in years. She had a month to consider Isaac's proposal, but in her heart, she already knew her answer. The weeks passed in a blur of activity as Virginia divided her time between teaching, helping at the boarding house and preparing the cabin for habitation. Mr. Finch had provided the keys once the sale was completed, and Virginia spent every spare moment cleaning, repairing, and furnishing her future home. Mrs. Collins helped her select essential furniture at reasonable prices, while Mr. Wilson contributed a sturdy cooking stove in exchange for Virginia's continued assistance with his bookkeeping. The Patterson family gifted her with handmade quilts and curtains, transforming the once bare cabin into a place of warmth and comfort. Throughout these preparations, Virginia maintained a careful silence about Isaac's proposal. Though Mrs. Collins clearly suspected something significant had transpired between them, she respected Virginia's privacy enough not to pry. Letters arrived weekly from Colorado, where Isaac reported successful negotiations for both properties. His words grew increasingly affectionate, yet he never pressured her for a decision, maintaining his promise to give her time for consideration. Virginia responded with equally warm letters, sharing details of the cabin's transformation and life in Colfax, yet also refraining from revealing her heart fully. Some things, she believed, were better said in person. As the appointed month drew to a close, Virginia moved the last of her belongings from the boarding house to the cabin. Though she had enjoyed Mrs. Collins's hospitality, there was incomparable satisfaction in standing in the middle of her own home, humble though it might be. That evening, as she sat beside the fireplace in the cabin's main room, Virginia opened her journal, the one Isaac had given her, and wrote what might be her final entry as Virginia Ashwood. "Tomorrow Isaac returns, and I will give him my answer. Though I have known him for such a short time in the grand scheme of life, I cannot imagine a future without him in it. He asks me to share his dream, but in truth, he has already become part of mine. Together, I believe we can build something finer than either of us could create alone. My mother once told me that love isn't always a thunderbolt, sometimes it's a slow recognition of having found where you belong. With Isaac, I've experienced both, the initial shock of connection and the gradual certainty that this is right. So tomorrow, I will say yes. Yes to partnership, to shared labor and shared joy, to building a life together in Colorado. My father once tried to sell me to the highest bidder. Instead, I found a man who asked nothing in return for his kindness, a man who sees me as equal, not property. Whatever challenges lie ahead, we will face them together." She closed the journal and placed it carefully in the wooden chest beside her bed before extinguishing the lamps. Tomorrow would bring the beginning of a new chapter, one she would write together with Isaac Burke. Morning dawned clear and crisp, with the first hints of winter in the air. Virginia rose early, donning her green dress, the same one she had worn for their first proper supper together. After arranging her hair and pinning her mother's locket at her throat, she stepped outside to survey her small domain. The cabin looked welcoming, with smoke curling from the chimney and chrysanthemums she had transplanted blooming beside the door. She had accomplished much in a month, transforming the neglected structure into a true home. Pride swelled within her not only for what she had created, but for the woman she had become since that terrible day on the auction block. The sound of approaching hoofbeats pulled her from her reflections. Shading her eyes against the morning sun, Virginia watched as a familiar figure appeared on the road leading to her cabin. Her heart quickened as Isaac drew closer, sitting tall and straight in the saddle. He dismounted in one fluid motion, securing his horse to the hitching post she had installed specifically for this purpose. When he turned toward her, the happiness evident on his face matched the joy bubbling in her own chest. "Virginia," he said, removing his hat as he approached. "You're even more beautiful than I remembered. "And you're exactly as handsome as I recalled," she replied with a smile. "Welcome to my home, Isaac." He glanced at the cabin, noting the improvements. "Your home," he repeated. "You've worked wonders in just a month." "I've had help." The people of Colfax have been remarkably generous. They stood for a moment, drinking in each other's presence after the separation. "Would you like to come inside?" Virginia finally asked. "I've prepared coffee." Isaac shook his head. "Not yet. First, I need your answer, Virginia." "I've thought of little else during my journey." Virginia took a deep breath, her decision crystallizing into absolute certainty in that moment. "My answer is yes, Isaac Burke. Yes, I will marry you and build a life with you in Colorado." The joy that transformed his features was worth every doubt, every hesitation she had experienced. In 2 quick strides, Isaac closed the distance between them, gathering her into his arms and lifting her off her feet in an exuberant embrace. "You've made me the happiest man in the territory," he declared, setting her gently back on her feet but keeping his arms around her waist. Virginia laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. "And when shall this marriage take place? I assume you don't intend to wait until spring." "I had thought perhaps next week, if that suits you," Isaac replied, his expression turning serious. "The Colorado properties are secured, but there's much to do before winter sets in. I'd like us to be settled there before the first heavy snow." "Next week," Virginia echoed, momentarily overwhelmed by how quickly her life was changing. "Yes, I believe that would be suitable. Nothing elaborate, just a simple ceremony." "With one condition," Isaac added, his eyes twinkling. "It must be held here at your cabin. Our first home together, however briefly we occupy it." Virginia's heart swelled at his thoughtfulness. "I would like that very much." He bent to kiss her then, a kiss that sealed their agreement and promised a future filled with mutual respect and deepening affection. When they finally parted, both were slightly breathless. "Now," Virginia said, taking his hand, "would you like to see what I've done with our cabin?" The week that followed passed in a whirlwind of preparations. News of their engagement spread quickly through Colfax, met with general approval and surprising enthusiasm. Far from generating scandal, Virginia's transition from auction block to respectable bride seemed to satisfy the town's collective sense of justice. Mrs. Patterson insisted on hosting a small gathering for the women of Colfax to present Virginia with gifts for her new home. Mr. Wilson closed his store early one afternoon to help Isaac reinforce the cabin's roof before their departure. Sheriff Thomas offered his wagon to transport their belongings to Colorado, as he had business in that direction himself. Reverend Johnson agreed to perform the ceremony at the cabin, expressing particular satisfaction at uniting the couple. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," he told Virginia when she visited to make arrangements. "What began as a terrible injustice has led to a most promising union." On the morning of the wedding, Virginia awoke in her cabin for what would be both her first night there alone and her last night as an unmarried woman. The irony was not lost on her as she prepared for the day ahead. Mrs. Collins arrived mid-morning, bearing wildflowers gathered from the hills surrounding Colfax. "For your bouquet," she explained, placing them in water. "Every bride should carry flowers, even one as practical as you." As Virginia donned a new dress of ivory muslin, her one extravagance for the occasion, Mrs. Collins arranged her hair with the same tenderness a mother might show. "I'm proud of you," the older woman said, securing the final pin. "You've overcome more in 6 months than many face in a lifetime." Virginia squeezed her hand gratefully. "I couldn't have done it without your kindness." "Nonsense. You would have found your way regardless." Mrs. Collins stepped back to admire her handiwork. "There, you look every inch the bride." By noon, the small clearing in front of the cabin had been transformed. Chairs borrowed from various establishments in town formed rows facing the porch, where Reverend Johnson would conduct the ceremony. A table laden with food and drink stood beneath the cottonwood trees, courtesy of Mrs. Patterson and other ladies of Colfax. Isaac arrived with Sheriff Thomas, both men freshly shaved and dressed in their Sunday best. Isaac's obvious nervousness endeared him further to Virginia, who watched through the window as he greeted the gathering guests with somewhat stiff formality. "Time to begin," Mrs. Collins announced as the last townspeople took their seats. "Are you ready, my dear?" Virginia nodded, suddenly unable to speak past the lump in her throat. 6 months ago she had stood on an auction block, her value measured in dollars and cents. Today, she stood on the threshold of a new life with a man who valued her for herself alone. She stepped onto the porch to find Isaac waiting, his expression transforming from anxiety to wonder as he caught sight of her. Reverend Johnson took his place before them as the gathered townspeople fell silent. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, with traditional vows exchanged in clear, steady voices. When Isaac slipped a simple gold band onto Virginia's finger, another gift he had purchased during his time in Colorado, the significance of the moment brought tears to her eyes. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Johnson declared with evident satisfaction. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Isaac's kiss was gentle but held a promise of passion that brought color to Virginia's cheeks, particularly given their audience. When they turned to face the assembled guests, the applause was enthusiastic and genuine. The celebration that followed was filled with laughter, good food, and heartfelt wishes for their future. As evening approached, the guests gradually departed until only Isaac and Virginia remained, standing together on the porch of their cabin. "Mrs. Burke," Isaac said softly, drawing her into his arms. "How does it feel to bear a new name?" Virginia smiled up at him, her heart full to bursting. "Like the beginning of the best chapter of my story." Later that night, as moonlight filtered through the cabin windows, Virginia lay in Isaac's arms, marveling at the unexpected turns her life had taken. From destitution to dignity, from solitude to partnership, all because one man had refused to participate in an injustice. "What are you thinking?" Isaac murmured against her hair. "That I'm grateful," she replied honestly, "for everything that led me here, even the difficult parts." He tightened his arms around her. "I plan to spend the rest of my life ensuring you never face such difficulties again." Virginia raised herself on one elbow to gaze down at her husband's face, illuminated by the dying embers in the fireplace. "And I plan to stand beside you through whatever challenges we encounter together." 3 days later, they departed Colfax with Sheriff Thomas, their possessions loaded in his wagon while they rode alongside on horseback Virginia, on a gentle mare that had been the town's collective wedding gift to her. As they crested the hill that would take Colfax from view, Virginia reined her horse to a halt, turning for one last look at the town that had witnessed her transformation. "Having second thoughts?" Isaac asked, bringing his gelding alongside hers. Virginia shook her head, smiling. "Not at all. Just acknowledging a debt of gratitude, to the town, to circumstances." She reached across to squeeze his hand. "If my father hadn't tried to sell me, you would never have intervened. We would never have met." Isaac considered this, his expression thoughtful. "Perhaps. Or perhaps we would have found each other by some other path. I prefer to believe some meetings are destined, regardless of the route." Virginia laughed softly. "For a practical cowboy, you harbor surprisingly romantic notions. Only where you're concerned, Mrs. Burke." He lifted her hand to his lips. "Shall we continue to our new home?" With a nod, Virginia turned her horse toward the horizon, and the future that awaited them in Colorado, a future built on mutual respect, shared dreams, and a love that had begun with an act of unexpected kindness on an auction block in Colfax, New Mexico territory. 5 years later, Virginia stood on the porch of their Colorado ranch house, watching as Isaac demonstrated rope techniques to their 4-year-old son, James. The boys' delighted laughter carried across the yard, mingling with the distant lowing of cattle and the clucking of chickens in the nearby coop. Their daughter, Elizabeth, not quite 2, played at Virginia's feet, arranging pebbles in careful patterns that made sense only to her. Virginia rested one hand on her swelling abdomen, where their third child grew steadily larger with each passing day. The ranch had prospered beyond their most optimistic expectations. Isaac's skill with horses had drawn buyers from as far as California, while Virginia's careful management of their finances had allowed for steady expansion. What had begun as a dream shared by 2 people who barely knew each other had blossomed into a thriving enterprise and a loving family. "Mama, look," James called, successfully twirling the small rope Isaac had crafted for him. "I did it. Wonderful," Virginia called back, her heart swelling with pride and love. Isaac scooped their son onto his shoulders and approached the porch, his face lined now with 5 years of working outdoors, but his eyes still bright with the same warmth that had first drawn her to him. "I believe we have a future rancher on our hands," he announced, settling James beside his sister. Virginia smiled, leaning into Isaac's embrace as he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Like father, like son. How are you feeling today?" he asked, his hand gently covering hers on her stomach. "Strong," she replied truthfully, "though ready for this little one to make an appearance in the next month or so." Isaac pressed a kiss to her temple. "You amaze me every day, Virginia Burke." As the children played at their feet and the sun began its descent toward the mountains, Virginia reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From the humiliation of that auction block to the peace and prosperity of their current life, a transformation that still seemed miraculous at times. "What are you thinking?" Isaac asked, echoing a question he had posed many times over their years together. Virginia turned in his arms to face him fully, her heart as full now as it had been on their wedding day. "That some debts can never be repaid, and that's as it should be." Isaac's expression softened with understanding. "You've more than repaid any debt you imagined you owed me, Virginia. This life we've built together, it's beyond anything I dreamed possible." "As is mine," she agreed, rising on tiptoe to kiss him softly. The sun cast long golden rays across their land as they stood together, surrounded by the family they had created, and the home they had built, proof that sometimes the most meaningful gifts are those offered with no expectation of return.